Welcome, everyone. We're going to begin our session, which is going to be people analytics, where we discuss what it looks like for organizations going from the crawl phase of people analytics, and then they transition into walk into run. So with that, I guess we move on to the next slide. All right, so I'm Alex Aguilar. I'm a senior product manager here in people analytics at Perceptyx. Joining me today will be Brett Wells, our director of people analytics and professional services, and Cody Fenter, a solutions consultant. On the line, or people who will be watching the chat in the QA, will be Jamie Alford, a relationship manager here at Perceptyx, as well as Tom Hanna, a product manager at Perceptyx as well. Now, for how the session will work, we actually have two different ways for everyone to be able to provide feedback or ask questions. The first one will be the QA feature. This can be found down here at the bottom of your Zoom window. And as we work through the materials, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them into there, and either Jamie or Tom will highlight them and call them out for us to be able to address as we work through the session, or provide a response if it's a little bit more straightforward. Additionally, while we anticipate many of you wanting to interact with us, but maybe not just using questions, but rather to provide feedback or to answer some questions that we may pose to you, I would encourage everyone to put that into the chat in Zoom as well. Again, those will be monitored. So with that, I would encourage everyone to be as interactive as they prefer. You may speak up, you may not, but either way, we will be around and we will be addressing the questions as they arise. Next slide. So the agenda for this session will be that we're going to provide an overview for how we view people analytics here at Perceptyx. We're then going to discuss what it looks like in moving from the more foundational crawl phase into the walk into the run phase of people analytics. And to really help drive home what that looks like in practice, Cody's going to walk us through some examples for what the crawl, the walk, and the run phase will look like in the Perceptyx platform. And then once we've addressed what that looks like, we will then begin to address what it would look like for an organization who wants to go above and beyond run into more of a personalized approach. And this is where Brett will provide us more information around what that looks like when you work with his team in developing those more personalized white glove experiences. But before we proceed, and I want to be very clear, I know that I hear people analytics. I'm sure that many of you hear people analytics, and we all have different ideas for what that is. So before we dive into the actual material, I thought it was very important to take a moment and just really address how we view people analytics here at Perceptyx. So with this in mind, the way in which we evaluate and we consider people analytics is it's really about providing actionable insights to our users and making them available to better identify those breakthroughs, those insights, and those personalized recommendations. Think about getting those insights without having to do the work, and that's how we're viewing people analytics. Now, again, that's a really great idea, but really, why is this important? And this is where we've begun to break out how we see it and how we're offering it to our clients to really empower them to be successful. The first is that we are looking to create these analytics such that they're world-class, but that they're also driven by domain expertise. Many organizations will hire several data scientists thinking that will fix the problem, but then they will lack the ability to identify those actual insights that leaders are really going to trust in the organization. So to better combat that, we've looked to embed domain experts along with our data scientists to ensure that anything that we find is going to be incredibly meaningful to our clients. Additionally, we're going to make sure that any of those recommendations or insights that we are going to be creating are going to both be actionable in nature, and they're not going to be inundated with a technical jargon. I'm sure that many of you may know what a t-test is or what a standard deviation is, but not necessarily do you need to know that when it comes to identifying those recommendations. So rather than 600 lines of data, you may get 6 bullet points of identified recommendations. Now, for those of you out there questioning how we will be able to do this, we do have that technical nitty-gritty detail if you do want to see it, but the focus for us is about action and driving action. And additionally, for our users of our platform, we also want to work with them to understand that a survey may close, but that's not where the survey ends, but rather it's only the beginning as it relates to identifying those insights. And so what we're encouraging many of our clients to do is really begin to consider how they should go about continually updating data, because we have an always-on agent effectively that will be looking for changes within those insights as new data is received. Because while you may have a snapshot in time for survey responses, the associated HRIS data is going to change, or the other data that you want to incorporate will change over time. And it's important to not overlook that as we move forward. And with that, we've also got a lot of questions around, well, Alex, what else is there beyond HRIS data? And I'm glad that you asked, or maybe you didn't, but either way, we're looking to begin to leverage more non-traditional data as a way to provide insights. For example, when I was at a very large organization overseeing a survey, we had lots of data around how employees interacted with each other via emails, phone calls, messaging platforms that we may have used, but we couldn't use that data. We couldn't mine it for insights. And many organizations are not too dissimilar. However, the Perceptyx platform here, we're looking to actually incorporate that unstructured data, be it customer experience transaction, or maybe more of those interactions among employees, to drive actionable insights through maybe seemingly impossible analyses, such as a network analysis. So again, it's really about uncovering insights in that previously unknown or dark data. And everything I've said so far should sound really appealing. It would have sounded appealing to me. But the other thing I really want to call out is that while we're talking about these analyses, you're not going to, again, have to worry about doing some arduous, complex setup. We're going to make it as easy as possible by having processes in place that will take your data, and you simply, tick a few boxes and say, I want this or this, and we work through it. You're not going to have to be involved in that process unless you want to. If you want to go in with us, that's fine, but that's really not the focus here. We want to take the difficulty and complex analysis steps and make them easy for you. And then ultimately, while we're talking about people data, it would be a bit foolish to not also consider the larger business context. So as we're building these analytics out and we're making these available to our users, we also want to be mindful that we want to be able to stitch in that business data. So as I mentioned earlier, customer transaction data or other relevant business metrics, incorporating that in so that you can see a more holistic view into what you know about your people and what you know about your business, to be very mindful for how you can drive that action. So that's how we're looking at people analytics here at Perceptyx. Now with that, Brett's going to walk us through what it is going to look like for an organization moving through each of the stages.
All right, thanks, Alex. So during our time together today, we're going to take you on this crawl, walk, run journey and demonstrate the ways you can get the most value out of the platform today, leveraging its capabilities in data management, how you integrate data, the analytics, and most importantly, how you communicate and deliver insights and actions. The annual census, the now popular pulse surveys are widely used to garner these actual insights. In the crawl phase, we're going to highlight these insights, how they use artificial intelligence, informative dashboards, and reports to really put insights front and center to drive action at the grassroots level for teams and managers. In that walk phase, clients begin to augment their census and pulse surveys with life cycle surveys that target these pivotal moments that matter. These include candidate experience, onboarding, anniversaries, promotions, exit data, alumni surveys, the list goes on. And then finally, in the run phase, we'll showcase how our platform easily connects the dots among all these different survey streams of listening data with business metrics that matter. So linking it to turnover, customer experience, financial performance, really driving and understanding what are the levers if we push or pull on the employee experience side that make big impacts on the business side. And then as we go along this journey together, we ask that you be mindful of these questions here. So from a maturity standpoint, where is your organization at today? From possibilities, where is the low-hanging fruit to accelerate the maturity at your organization? Opportunities. What else can you find? What else do you find valuable as part of the Perceptyx platform? Maybe something we don't have in, but would be incredibly valuable to you on that journey. And then ownership. In what areas can we as your trusted provider help even more than we do today? If you have an aha light bulb moment for these questions, or for any other areas for that matter, please share it in the chat, as Alex mentioned. We really value your feedback. And with that, let's get crawling.
All right, so again, building upon what Brett had said, the focus for the organizations that find themselves in the crawl phase, or more that foundational stage where in which organizations go from using the survey as the single intervention, more of that check the box activity, into looking at and considering the strategic listening opportunity that really is a survey. They've no longer simply just focused on doing the survey, but rather they're mindful of how do they mine the data to find the meaningful outcomes or insights for organizational leaders. And so in this particular phase, when organizations are looking to shift away from just completing a survey and move into that first step, which of people analytics, these organizations are going to, as I mentioned, begin to shift their focus to identifying those actionable insights so that they can begin to drive change through those targeted and very mindfully focused, high impact actions. So rather than just saying, we're going to make change, we think it'll work, the now partners that are driving this survey would say, we have very much of a clear insight into where we can take action based upon what we're hearing from our employees. And ultimately, some of the signs that an organization will see that they are in crawling is that they're now being invited to new, maybe previously unwelcoming type of situations. And really what I mean by this is that typically HR, who are going to be driving the survey, will now be included in those strategy and business discussions. Again, as I mentioned, I previously oversaw a survey for a very large organization, and we generally weren't even in the crawl phase, so we never got invited to these meetings. But as we worked with an outside vendor and we began to pull together, we found ourselves being, involved in many of these previously previous meetings that we didn't necessarily even begin to consider being involved in. We were able to provide insights around strategy and business based upon what we knew from that survey. So for these organizations moving into that crawl phase, you should begin to see more meeting invites pop up around how you can provide insights to the business so you can be more mindful. And secondarily, the data itself is no longer the focus of the survey. While we say no more spreadsheet wrangling, the focus here is that you aren't simply going to be focused on pulling the data, but rather it's about how do you take that data and make it work for you? How do you identify those insights to help drive action within the business? And again, as Brett mentioned, many of these are going to be focused on the census and pulse surveys that are really, again, going to be considered the foundation for any people analytics strategy within an organization. And to help us understand what that looks like in practice, Cody's going to walk us through an example where we'll see just that within the Perceptyx platform.
Thank you so much. Let me close this out real quick. All right, so where we want to start with inside of the Perceptyx platform is obviously our ability to create these user dashboards. And these user dashboards are our ability to be able to bring that important information forward facing. And we can do this across the organization at different levels. Because our system is built on user permissions, it allows us to build personas across the organization where they have the ability to have access to the necessary tools and data that's relevant for them to be able to start making meaningful decisions and actions within inside of the organization. So our ability to customize the view of the data, the type of widgets that we bring forward, the focus points of the survey and the data that was collected and where it's relevant within inside of the organization is a key differentiator for Perceptyx. In addition, our ability and access to a number of different tools, we provide over 25 different analytic tools and capabilities within inside of the platform, really empowering HR business partners and leaders to have the ability to look through the data and understand where are those differences happening, how can I answer these meaningful questions for the leaders I support, and where do we need to focus our action within inside of the organization. A few ways that we do that is first by thinking about how we integrate our HRS data. The filtering platform within inside of the Perceptyx tool is a global filter. So what that means for us is it allows us to be able to refine our vision of the organization and open that perception of those specific employees we want to view within inside of the organization, and update the data in real time, not only in the part of the tool that we're seeing, such as the dashboard, but also allows us to navigate the other aspects of the analytic tools without having to reapply that filter. So looking at my specific part of the organization, I can move through the data and understand where are some of these differences or opportunities that I have available within inside of my business, and view those categories, those question-related data. When I want to think about more about how to answer these questions and understand what are the differences that these individuals are seeing as it relates to specific questions or categories, our ability to run these positive divergence analysis to understand what's driving that experience within inside of the organization is really as simple as one click. When I want to know more about that area around maybe intent to stay and understanding those perceptions of those individuals in my part of the business that want to stay with the organization, I can easily compare their experiences to the rest of the individuals across the organization. This allows me to focus on what are those key drivers that I need to view or take action on within inside of the business in order to make a meaningful change. It allows me to understand how big are the perceptual gaps between these individuals, those that intend to stay and those that do not. And I can continue to refine and come up with my action plan to say, well, based on that, I want to identify specific parts of that part of the organization that are maybe more at risk of individuals leaving the organization. And I can view that from any number of demographics within inside of the platform with relative ease to be able to understand where I need to take those drivers and be able to implement action across the organization where it's going to matter most. Again, thinking about how these filters are global, it allows us to further dive down and understand more about specifically maybe some of the comment related data that these individuals are providing us. It allows us to dive deeper and understand what are those perceptions of these individuals saying that they need to look at specific recommendations to improving that overall experience. What are some of those common themes that are coming through in the data, and what are some of those positive or negative sentiments as it relates to that information? The Perceptyx platform allows you to easily digest some of this qualitative data as it relates to some of the quantitative data that we're seeing, and relaying some of that information and connecting those dots between what we need to focus on and what are those individuals telling us that would help improve their overall situation. In addition to this, our ability to be able to go through and refine this data down to other parts of the business, we can compare those results as it relates to different aspects within inside of our demographic crosstab. Something that's unique about this is our ability to stack demographics and understand how those perceptions are differing between not only where they reside in the organization, but maybe a specific aspect about our population, and understand more about peeling back that layer of the onion and getting more granular in where these differences are coming up. When we talk about those user permissions and being able to, in this crawl phase, be able to disseminate information easily across the organization, everywhere we've looked inside of the platform is exportable into Excel or PDF if needed, but we have the ability to take this information and disseminate it throughout the organization in areas where it's meaningful for specific individuals. So from a manager's dashboard perspective, where maybe we don't need to provide them as many deep analytic capabilities, we have the ability to refine their data to make it easier for them to start taking action. What do they need to focus on, those key drivers of engagement? What are some of those recommendations that they can start considering? And what are some additional available resources that they can go ahead and start diving into in order to find new ways about taking action in that specific area? Again, because the system is in real time, once the data is finalized, we can have all of these tools available in the leader's hands the moment that the organization notifies us to do so. And we can provide them pre-built templates and reports as it relates to their specific information that they can take to their team to be able to have those meaningful conversations and take action. The system the document walks them through what's expected of them and then goes through the results and shows them how they compare to internal and external norms. what are some of their high performing and low performing areas, and what are some of those areas that they need to specifically focus on as it relates to their specific part of the business. So I'll pass this back to Alex and Brett, and we'll get into this walk phase.
Okay, so thank you for that walkthrough, Cody. For those organizations that have begun to move beyond the census pulse-based, more foundational approach to people analytics, and they've begun to go beyond that into looking to actually survey during other key events in an employee experience. And by doing so, they're better able and equipped to get a holistic view into what that experience is for each of their employees. And ultimately, when we say that they're surveying during those key moments, it's really those moments that matter most within the organization. So traditionally, many organizations may focus on onboarding, or they may focus on employees who've experienced maybe a job change due to an organizational transformation, or maybe even through some type of promotional experience, all the way through to those employees who have ultimately decided to leave the organization. And by conducting these surveys during those moments that matter, and again, really, when I say moments that matter, it's really those moments that are most valuable to the organization. What are those maybe key areas where the organization is spending the most money in either onboarding new employees, attempting to retain employees, attempting to keep employees engaged and wanting to stay? So the moments that matter aren't necessarily prescribed, but as the organizations are looking to incorporate this more, they get a better, more holistic view into this. And as a result, the organizations through time will begin to be able to develop more of that life cycle view into the experience of employees. And once an organization has that life cycle view, they can then begin to develop those profiles of those high potential individuals who want to stay with the organization, or those employees that ultimately leave, or maybe even those employees that experience a less than ideal onboarding experience. What were those key indicators that could have been avoided so that you don't replicate that with new employees coming into the organization? This is what's focused on being addressed in the multiple moments that matter. And as a result, the HR leaders that are overseeing this will begin to be seen as confidants to the organizations themselves. And what I mean by this is that no longer are HR leaders or those that are overseeing the survey being seen as scorekeepers, but instead they're going to be inundated with questions around, hey, what do I do here? How do I take action? I've hired in 10 new people. I'm seeing some concerns around whether or not they will be staying with the organization. How do I prevent them from leaving? And this is where having that life cycle view can be incredibly valuable. And again, since HR is no longer focused on that scorekeeping, the world's the oyster. I mean, ultimately what they can do is they can go out and create their new research questions and begin to push the bar of what's expected. Again, rather than just doing those once a year, once every 6 month surveys, they're now beginning to say, well, what happens to the employee experience and onboarding with regard to this particular organizational situation, or this type of demographic as it relates to a particular group of individuals, or something else entirely? What they want to look at is now much more powerful because they have multiple inputs of which they can incorporate in their analysis. And again, as we're looking at this, it's really around unifying those findings together into an integrated view, which Cody will be walking us through here, an example here in just a moment, as it relates to the Perceptyx platform. So with that, go ahead, Cody.
When we start talking about having multiple survey programs running within inside of the Perceptyx platform, we kind of land on this My Surveys page. And this My Surveys page allows us to integrate not only our managed survey programs such as census, onboarding, exit, those always on surveys, but as well as those on-demand surveys, those ad hoc surveys that we're administering across the organization for additional moments that matter. When we want to talk about working through the other moments that matter, our system allows us to do a few things with this My Surveys page. A, keep things organized, and B, also allows us to do cross-survey analytics to connect these data points between the two moments that matter and understand how they're impacting one another. Again, with the customization of the dashboards, we can alter the view of the data as it relates to how we're collecting it, what we need to push forward for leaders to be able to take action With inside of the exit survey, we have a number of different aspects that we're asking: what attracted them to the organization, where in the organization are we seeing more voluntary turnover, and how are some of our key categories or themes changing over time as individuals are leaving the organization. More often than not, we'll ask this question around: if you had to choose one reason that your primary reason for leaving the organization, what would that be? And we do this because we want to understand more about the differences between an individual who's retiring versus an individual who's leaving because they're dissatisfied with advancement opportunities, because their perceptions of the organization and their experience overall are most likely very different. In order for us to do the cross-survey analytics, we can go at it a couple of different ways. Much like the histogram bars in the favorability report, the ones with inside of your dashboard are also hyperlinks that allow you to filter on populations. I want to know more about my individuals that were dissatisfied with advancement opportunities and understand what were they telling us before they left the organization. The system will automatically create that filter and take us into our engagement survey, and it'll compare their results against the remainder of the organization to understand where their perceptions had the greatest difference in overall favorability. Here, we're understanding more that they were not provided as frequently or as much the opportunity to improve their skills, how they were involved in decisions that affect their work, some aspects around their manager experience, and then their overall intent to stay was much lower, being a key predictor around voluntary attrition. So with our ability to easily connect the dots between the different survey programs because they're running within inside of one platform allows us to understand, based on if we're seeing these results with inside of our engagement survey and we know that these individuals are leaving for a specific primary reason, when we see these lower scores in specific areas, we have the ability to be more predictive around what we need to focus on and where we need to take action. Thinking about this from an onboarding perspective as well, we often take into consideration those aspects of the employee experience and who in the organization are we hiring more of. In the onboarding data, a lot of our organizations that we support roll it out in a couple of different stages. Our example here is both at a 14-day and a 60-day onboarding survey. And I want to know more about my specific population, and I know we're hiring a lot of millennials currently. So I want to filter on their population and understand what are some of the opportunities that we're seeing as it relates to their onboarding experience at the 60-day mark. As I get into the data, I start seeing a couple aspects. Understanding career development is definitely our least favorable item, as well as someone explaining what performance objectives are expected of me. I can look and see, 10% of my millennials don't understand what's expected of them at the 60-day mark. What does their experience look like at the 60-day onboarding mark compared to the rest of the individuals onboarding in the organization? And we can see across the board, they have a much less favorable experience, specifically around their job, the future that they'll have with the organization, and their engagement. I want to know, what does this experience transfer into when we administer our engagement survey maybe 6 months later? What does this experience cascade into later on down the road? Through our life cycle reporting, I can go into that engagement survey and carry my filter over into that population, into that survey, and understand what are those key differences that we're seeing. For a millennial that doesn't understand what's expected of them late at the 60-day mark, later down the road when we're measuring a broader part of the employee experience, they're seeing much lower favorability as it relates to their growth and development, their manager relationships, and the way they feel empowered. And that level of engagement remains consistently lower across the organization. So again, our ability to be able to connect the dots between these different moments that matter and understand how they impact one another allows us to be more predictive in understanding what the overall outcome can be from one, or what can we do to help prevent some individuals from leaving the organization. And we can do these cross-survey analytics through a number of different survey platforms. It doesn't just have to be onboarding and exit. It can be the candidate experience, the manager or promotional experience. It can be through M&A surveys. So we have a number of different aspects. As long as the surveys are inside of the same platform with us, we have the ability to connect those analytic dots and those dots between the different individuals and understand how they're impacting one another.
All right, so before we dive right into the run here, I want to take a moment and pause and check with Jamie and Tom to see if we have any questions out there from the participants.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, hi everyone, Jamie Alford. So we do have a couple of questions in the chat here. The first one is, what is the ideal number of employees that makes it meaningful or provides an ROI? So maybe you could expound on that a little bit for us, Alex.
Well, I believe I see a response from Brett, so I'm actually going to ask him to weigh in on it first.
Well, thanks for passing it over. No, I'm happy to answer that. So it really depends on what metric you're targeting to move the needle on. So generally speaking, what you're going to find is more is always better to detect smaller effects. But what our team can do is kind of help you understand where you're at today on a metric. Like, let's say we're trying to move the needle on turnover, and what ideal would look like. How many people would we need to sample over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, etc., to identify whether there is a reliable change in that metric. So generally speaking, we need, though, more people to study smaller effects, and we can help calculate what's called a power analysis to determine what's that ideal sample that's required.
And just to bring it, oh, sorry, not to interrupt, but just to bring it around, as I mentioned earlier, Brett is an example of the domain expertise combined with our analysis. And that what we mean here is that there's definitely a technical element of it, but we're definitely willing and able to work with anyone to really understand where you're coming from as relates to your questions, either just in the platform, or if you want to get more of a personalized experience and actually interact with someone to get a plan in place so that you can be successful in capturing that data. Because ultimately, again, we're trying to be as meaningful as it relates to working with people data, because it's not like any other data, because it really is unique because it is people.
Thanks, Alex and Brett. We do have one additional question. It's part of it's a two-parter. How can I make the case for a long-term investment in a third-party survey tool? How do you support multi-year business continuity? And then, is Perceptyx a part of any data marketplaces? AWS, Azure, Snowflake? Any thoughts there?
I can speak to the last question. So we aren't currently a part of any of those marketplaces today. We do have plans to provide our end users some of those RESTful APIs, so you're able to make those calls and integrate into other areas. We're going to make it very easy for someone to maybe pull their data out and do their own personalized analysis if they want, as well as bringing up our overall analytics game as well. So if you are looking to export it into one of those, we can certainly work to do that. It just will be a little bit longer tail, and we're getting that implemented now.
Thanks, Alex. And then Brett, did you want to talk about making the case for the long-term investment in a third-party survey tool?
Yeah, absolutely. So out of the gate, there's certainly a lot of savings to be had in terms of just cost savings on your own people's time. So with a managed survey, the Perceptyx team really carries the load and makes sure that communications and the technology and reporting is all top notch, and it's not falling on just your team's shoulders. And then over the long term, really showing that improvement on other business metrics that matter is we fold into the platform those business metrics. So maybe we look at absenteeism, turnover, shrink or theft in retail, safety incidences, patient outcomes, patient safety, your customer engagement or loyalty, productivity and sales. I mean, the list goes on in terms of the metrics that we routinely ingest into our tool. And then our platform brings to the forefront what are those barriers to really moving the needles on those metrics. So you can start action planning and leveraging a better employee experience to drive things like retention of your top performers.
Great. Thank you. We do have one more that just came in. So are you invested in automated analysis, fewer clicks for the end user? So the tool highlights and summarizes insights for the user, so the user isn't looking for all the needles in a haystack.
Yep, absolutely. That is something that we are looking to implement in the coming months to year. We are definitely very mindful that while we can certainly enable someone to go through and do analyses, we don't want you to have to spend all that time pointing and clicking and running those reports. We're really working on bringing more functionality around surfacing those insights in a more meaningful way. So I would say definitely stay tuned. You will see that being rolled out over the next few months to a year, and you'll be really hopefully impressed by what we're able to identify for you without having to do a lot of pointing and clicking.
Great, thanks, Alex. That wraps up the questions that we do have currently in the chat, but just a reminder for everyone on the call, along the bottom of the Zoom, along that ribbon, you'll see a chat function and a Q&A section. So please don't hesitate to put your questions in there.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Alex.
Absolutely. Now turning back into the running phase of people analytics. In this particular situation, this is where organizations are going to be focused on connecting those survey-derived metrics or insights and connecting them to other organizational metrics. And by doing this, organizations are going to want to link that employee survey response data to other business data, which may incorporate things like performance management or other types of metrics that are present within the organization, so they can better understand how they connect and what may drive or not drive something. And in this situation, it's really around going beyond just having data to beginning to develop that data story. How do you better pull that data together to identify those compelling insights and present a case, so to speak, to the end user so that they want to take action rather than asking what to do. They're chomping at the bit to figure out what they can do. And this is where that partner in HR with the organization can be very successful. And this is where HR goes from just being, again, someone who's scorekeeping, being invited to the occasional meeting, to now driving some of those decisions being made, both with regard to talent as well as within the organization. Instead of learning about something, HR leaders are now saying, hey, we might want to consider this given what we know about our people today. Instead of being surprised by opening 10 new stores, HR may be able to say, well, if we want to make that approach for growth, we might want to consider this, this, and this instead, which isn't necessarily always the case in many organizations. So it's really about making those HR organizational leaders successful leaders within the organization outright. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Cody, who's going to walk us through our third and final example.
All right, thank you so much, Alex. So again, with inside of the Perceptyx platform, a big part of it, again, when we talked about those filters, is our ability to incorporate those other aspects of the business from a number of different angles. We talked about patient safety, customer satisfaction, revenue, shrink. Is if you have that data with inside your organization and it's not captured with inside your HRS data file, that's perfectly fine. We can load those into our platform and allow the system to treat them as demographics, giving you the ability to filter on those specific populations, groups within inside of the organization, and understand how their data is different than everyone else's, how their experiences are impacting the overall other parts of the business. As an example within here, one way we can think about doing that is by looking at parts of the business and relating it back to specific information such as turnover, and how it relates to other performance metrics inside of the organization. So I want to look at a specific part of my organization, and I want to go to specifically those individuals that are considered high performers in my business. What are they experiencing that the rest of the organization is not? And how many of them potentially intend to stay versus the rest of the organization? Being that it's a global filter, again, I can freely navigate the entirety of the site, all of the data updates with inside of the dashboard, as well as the other analytic tools. And within here, I can understand what's driving engagement for them. But when I want to dive a little bit deeper and understand what does it look like for the intent to stay, I really want to retain more of these key performers and high performers inside of the organization. I have the ability to, again, go to my category level views, understand what it looks like for that intent to stay, understand what's driving intent to stay within inside of this population, and taking those actions into, or those differences into meaningful actions, knowing that I can focus on these specific aspects of their employee experience, knowing that it will give us the greatest bang for our buck when we're looking to overall increase the level of retention within inside of our organization for our key performers within a certain part of the business. Where a lot of this other analytics comes into play when we're talking about integrating it into other parts of the business and also pulling in those other metrics, maybe from the walk phase when we're incorporating those other moments that matter, is our ability to integrate these into specific dashboards that answer specific questions. So one of the questions from the audience was around automated features. While those are coming out, our ability to operate and pull in integrated dashboards to answer specific questions as it relates to the business and those other metrics that we incorporate as demographics, we can do this right now. This specific example is looking at the attrition risk with inside of our organization, and it pulls in data from a number of different surveys. What does our intent to stay look like with inside of the organization, and what do we need to focus on to retain that key talent? Knowing that what we need to focus on, where do we need to take those actions and start implementing them across the organization for different key job roles? Again, we can pull in other demographics, especially those ones that we've taken from outside of your HRS data file, and incorporate these into these style of integrated dashboards. And based on what we know we need to work on and where we need to take action, are there any common threads that we're seeing as it relates to the onboarding or exit surveys? Again, thinking about the other survey programs that you could implement from candidate experience, new hires or managers or M&A, we can incorporate those other data points from those surveys into these specific dashboards to answer the questions that are most important to you and your organization. So seeing that we have data coming in around this dissatisfaction with advancement opportunities from the exit survey, that's falling in line with what's an opportunity with inside of our early experiences for employees as they're onboarding. And we know that that ties back to what we need to focus on ultimately as it relates to keeping our key talent with inside of the organization from an engagement survey perspective. And again, we can build these integrated dashboards to answer a wide range of different questions that are specific to your organization. That's where our consulting expertise comes into play and allows us to really work with the organization, meet them where they're at, and be able to understand what do we need to be asking in order to achieve your key business outcomes as it relates to the employee experience and other aspects of your business. And then we can bring that data forward to answer these questions by reducing the number of clicks in the system to ultimately not search through the haystack for the needle, but put the needle up front and then allow you to easily pull the thread through.
Cody, this is Jamie. Did you see the question in the chat that asked if we could only have a dashboard if we integrate with our HRIS system or upload a new data file? Brett did respond, but I thought maybe you might want to respond to that real quick.
Yeah, so we can do both integrations and data uploads, but when it comes to the dashboards, the part of the power of the system is having that HRS data file or other metrics across your organization where we can identify populations of individuals. But we can still build integrated dashboards if you don't have an HRS data file and still pull in those data points from other surveys.
Great, thank you.
All right, thanks, Cody. So what I see is the biggest mistake teams just starting out make is they skip over the crawl phase, the walk phase, they skip and go right to running with scissors, which is incredibly dangerous for a youngling, so to speak, in the people analytics space. And these teams make the mistake of going after the big bets, the moonshots. And they're incredibly attractive because if solved for, they add tremendous value to the organization. But because of that increased value, they're often highly complex, more so than you even initially thought or scope out. And they involve many interdependencies. So you may experience challenges from other parts of the business. You might have data issues, getting the right data, having to go to other teams to get the right data. And if you fail at these, which is often the case out of the gate, teams get quickly relegated to just trivial endeavors or pet projects that don't really add a lot of value to the business. So what I recommend out of the gate is targeting quick wins. And in short, you're confident that you'll be able to deliver a reasonable amount of time and with tangible results. You might consider, in terms of complexity, the internal politics at play, those interdependencies, whether you have the skills to do the work on the team, the data itself, the technology requirements, How easy would it be to implement a solution if you found the results you're hoping for? And then when it comes to value, you might consider things like that ROI, calculating an ROI, the time it's going to take to show any kind of impact, and then the opportunity costs, because you can do other projects maybe at the expense of, for example, a big bet. Cody, if we go to the next slide, 73% of HR professionals say that people analytics is a major priority for their organization over the next 5 years, but more than 55% say they still need help putting basic people analytics into practice. And that's for a variety of reasons, due to capability or competency or just capacity constraints. Every team we work with has a laundry list of items on their whiteboard, and they would love to have that pressure relief valve to help out and lend support. To this end, I wanted to mention that our consulting services team provides great value on top of the technology. I like to use the analogy that our technology is like a Ferrari race car. You are the driver of that car, and our consulting team is really that pit crew to help you solve problems, navigate obstacles, and win that race. And our team can help you identify what are those quick wins or even big bets, help clean, blend, analyze data, communicate those results into executive presentations, or even create custom interactive dashboards. And then being mindful of time, Cody, can we go 2 slides ahead? Here's a de-identified case study. We've done about a dozen people analytics projects over the last 6 months and answer a variety of business questions. So for example, what's the optimal team design in terms of layers and spans to improve engagement and performance? What is the impact of our monetary reward system on engagement and performance? What's the relationship between nurse employee engagement and patient experience and safety? The list goes on. And this case study was looking at what are the risk factors for first year turnover and who's most at risk for leaving. And when we merged 3 years of onboarding, census, and exit data, we found that more than 40% of new hires at this company left the organization within the first 8 months. And this quickly flattens after the 8 months. So if we get them to that 8-month mark, it's incredibly valuable to their organization. And we were able to predict with 85% accuracy if a new hire would term or stay within the first year, and then identified the actionable risk factors. And primary to this was career development. So those unfavorable in this area were 6 times more likely to intend to leave and more than 2 times more likely to terminate in the following year. And as such, that organization now is action planning on career development opportunities, especially for their at-risk populations that we identified, and is going on right now to determine what's that impact. In addition, a next survey is being used using our tile and drill feature to have employees select their top 3 attractive career growth development opportunities, and then also rate how the organization is living up to their expectations in each of those areas. So providing those actual insights is crucial to really moving the needle on a metric such as turnover in this case. And then if we go to the last slide, Cody, we'll have Alex kind of wrap us up here.
With that, we are definitely at time, but I wanted to thank you all for participating. And I wanted to invite everyone out there who's interested to help us shape the future of people analytics by providing us feedback in our survey. Any of the feedback that you provide will certainly be considered for any of the potential innovations and features that we look to roll out. And really, we want to make sure that whatever tool we develop is something that you all want and is going to be valuable for you, versus us going off and creating what we think is cool. So with that, we are at time, but if there are any questions, I would encourage everyone, you can put them in the chat now. Otherwise, I guess we're done.